Okay, today we're going to talk about how to use the joiner. The joiner is a machine that is very similar to a jack plane, but it's got a motor in it, and we're going to use this to flatten the board. The boards that we start off with are rough sawn and not flat, so we have to find some way to get the board flat and smooth, and the joiner is the way to do that. We could use the planer. If you take a look over here to this machine is the planer. We'll be using that a little bit later. A lot of people say, why don't we just run the board through the planer? But the problem with the planer is that's going to flatten the board as it goes through. So we first have to create one flat surface. And if you look at this right here, you can see that this board has got a little space in the middle. So if we put it in the planer is going to push this down and flatten it. It'll make it smooth in the machine, but when it comes back out, it's going to pop back to its original shape. So we're going to make a flat face so that when it goes to the planer to do the second face, it will come out nice and flat and it won't spring back to any original shape. And it's also going to be used to do an edge. So all we're going to do here is one face and one edge, typically on a joint. Okay. So the purpose of the machine, and again, there's a handout that goes along with this lesson, so you can follow along on the handout. So the purpose of the machine is to plane the surface of a board flat, and it will also make it smooth in the process, and to plane the surface to an exact angle. And we have the fence here that we set to 90 degrees. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's not capable of planing both faces parallel. I could run the board through this way and this way, but on this side, the board's going to rock. So if I have pushed down a little bit more on one side than the other, there's no guarantee that this second face will come out parallel to the first face I did. So that's why we need the planer. So it's not dangerous to run the second face, but it's not going to do anything for us. Plus, we have no control for thickness. So we do one face and one edge, and the second edge, same thing. A lot of kids will come over and run the second edge over. Makes it look nice, but eventually we're going to cut it off because right now this board's still too wide. So when I cut it to width, I'm still going to throw that away, so why bother? So one face, one edge is what we're going to be using this for. It's not designed to do end grain. Do not run a board over the joiner end grain. When you get to the end, because of the way the cutter head turns, it'll blow out the end. Okay, so this is not for end grain. It's only for cutting with the grain. One face, one edge. All right? And we can also cut chamfers and tapers. We can tilt this fence so that the board can go through this way, and we can clip off a corner. We don't use it a lot for that. There's better ways to do it. But it can do that, and it can do some other minor joinery. But again, this is really not what the machine is designed to do. It's basically to flatten the face and an edge. Okay? So let's talk about some of the parts next. So the machine has two tables to it. This is called the in-feed table. This is called the out-feed table, because the board goes in here and out there. Duh. Okay. We have a cutter head on the inside here, and the cutter head right here has a knife on it, which actually this machine has three that spin around and take the wood off. There's a guard right here that covers the cutter head. We have a fence, and the fence has some controls on it. This control on the back, if you loosen it, lets you move the fence in and out depending on how wide the board is, and then you lock it by pushing it this way. You don't have to push it real hard to lock it. Right? Just a little bit of pressure locks it in place. This clamp here allows you to change the angle. So if I loosen this, I can change the angle on the fence. So if I wanted to do something other than 90, I can change it. Excuse me. It has a little indexing pin here that if you allow it to go in, there's a little pin that fits into this notch right here. If you turn it so the pin falls in the notch, this will kind of lock it in, if I let it work right, at 90, like that. Theoretically, that's 90 degrees, but I find that it's not always real accurate. So we keep a tri-square nearby. So I always like to check it with the tri-square to make sure it's 90, and you can see right there it's not. So what I do is I pull the little indexing pin out, and I adjust the fence so that it is 90, and then I clamp it tight. So whenever I come to the joiner, I take the tri-square, put it just in front of the guard, check it up against the fence, make sure my fence really is 90. Okay, it does get off, so do check it. Okay, that's important. Okay, so we talked about the fence. We have the in-feed and out-feed table, cutter head, guard, and now in the front there's a scale that tells you how much is taking off. This machine, the scale, tells you how much it takes off on each pass. It looks like it's in 16ths, but it's really 30 seconds. So you can see they label every eighth of an inch. So if that's 0, there's an eighth of an inch. Half of an eighth is a 16th, so half of a 16th is a 32nd. These are 30 seconds. This machine can take a 16th at a time. That's usually where we keep it set. So that would be the second line. Now the way we adjust it, there's 2 locking knobs here. These locking knobs, when you loosen them, it allows you to adjust the table. Each table can go up and down independently. And around the corner from the locking knob is an adjusting wheel. So I would loosen the locking knob, which lets me adjust it. And then by turning the adjusting wheel, I can lower or raise the table. So I'm going to keep it right at a 16th here. That's second line. And then snug this up. Right? All that's doing is lowering the infeed table. So the lower the infeed table, the more the board runs into the cutter head. Okay? The outfeed table should not be adjusted except when we put new knives in. So when I have a guy come and sharpen my machine, he usually just swaps out the knives, puts in a fresh set of sharp knives in. We readjust the outfeed table to the top of the arc of the knives. So as the board comes off the cutter head, it perfectly lands on top of the outfeed table. So do not adjust the outfeed table. Right? We painted the locking knob red as a reminder so you don't adjust that by accident. Right? Again, so do not adjust the outfeed table. The infeed table is what you adjust to change the depth of cut. The cutter head does not go up and down, it's stationary. Okay, and I believe that's all the parts. Okay, some working capacities. What are the things that this can do? Now this is an 8-inch joiner, which means the widest board that we can do on this joiner is 8 inches. The cutter head width is 8 inches across. They make joiners of different sizes. They make them as small as 4 inches, which are kind of narrow, 6-inch, 8-inch. I've seen 12-inch, 24-inch, and usually the wider the machine it is, the longer the tables will be. Okay, so the size of the machine has to do with its maximum width. So this is an 8-inch joiner. The widest board we can do on this is 8 inches. Okay, the shortest board I want you to run over the joiner in length. Now we're talking about length of the board, right? This way. So the shortest board I want you to do on this is a foot. Nothing shorter than 12 inches on the joiner. All right, it starts to get too small and a little bit on the danger side because it's got to span that gap in the table while it's running. Right? So our boards for this particular project are 17 inches long at this point, so that's plenty long enough. Right, but nothing shorter than 12 inches. And like I said before, please don't take more than a 16th at a time on our machine because then it starts to be a lot for the motor. So again, on the handout, shortest board's 12, widest board is 8, maximum depth of cut is a 16th, and of course the fence will adjust from 90 to 45 degrees. We're going to be, all the work we're doing right now is at 90. So check it with the square to make sure it's 90 like we just talked about. Let's talk a little bit about safety on the joiner. Now the joiner is one of those machines you got to really be thinking about what you're doing when you're here because there's lots of potential for some serious injury. Most people are pretty aware of that, so when you hear, you're pretty focused. But you got a cutter head here that's spinning around that can do a lot of damage to fingers. All right, so we want to keep them out of there. There's some basic safety rules for any machine that we talked about in the past. Complete attention should be given to the work being done on the machine, no talking. Obviously, when you're here and you work in this machine, you should not be talking to anybody. You should be focused on what you're doing and thinking about what you're doing. Make sure nobody's around you, nothing that you're tripping over. All right, just be focused on what you're doing. Remove all jewelry, roll up your sleeves, tie back long hair, get permission from the instructor before you use the machine, and that's for every machine. When you're, even after you're checked out on the joiner, I want to know you're here. Say, Mr. Chick, I'm at the joiner, before you turn it on, so I know you're there. Make sure you get a response from me too. And if you're not familiar with the machine, if you forgot something, please come back to me. Don't ask another student for advice on how to run a machine. If you forgot how to run the joiner, come back to me. Say, Mr. Chick, can you check my setup, or can you show me how to do this again? I'm more than happy to show you that a second time, or a third time, or a fifth time. I'm never going to get upset with you for asking me for help to re-show you something, right? That's why I'm here, okay? Some specific safety for the machine itself, right? Make all adjustments with the power off and the machine at a complete stop. Do not try to adjust the table height or the fence position with the machine running or even coasting. Make sure it's at a dead stop. If your fingers accidentally get into that cutter head, they're gone. There's nothing left. Guard should be in place at all times. Don't run this machine without the guard on it. Check the board for loose knots or any imperfections. If there's a knot that looks like it's going to fall out, come and show me and we'll talk about whether or not that's safe to run over the machine. Sometimes the board was the bottom board on the pile when it was put on the floor and it was delivered, and maybe there's a little pebble stuck in it or something like that. You run that over the cutter head, it's going to put a nasty nick in the knives. So just take a quick look and make sure that your wood is clean and sound, right? Obviously, we're not going to be running any boards with screws or nails over the cutter head. Always use push sticks when there's not a reasonable distance of safety for your hands, especially when planing the face of a board or narrow boards. So the way we're going to run these boards through the machine is this way. First of all, this was not going to fit through here this way, so I'll have to push the fence back. By the way, you can't push the fence back too far. I might as well show you this now. When you push this back, I can go past the cutter head. I don't like sticking my fingers in here with this, even with it off. But if you look down from here, you can see that the fence has gone past the cutter head. And if I try to plane that, the wood beyond the cutter head is not going to get cut. So if you do push the fence back near its limit, stand over it and make sure that you didn't go too far, all right? And then you're going to have a little bit of cutter head showing out on this side. I like to have maybe a half an inch or so of cutter head beyond the board on the near side, and not past the cutter head, obviously, on the back side. Now, when I run this board through the joiner, we're going to talk about this again in a minute, but I want to make sure I'm using push sticks, and I like to use 2 push sticks with my hands. So I'm going to hold the board in this manner, and as I push it through, right at this point, that's probably the most dangerous point in time because the guard has swung out of the way and the board yet hasn't covered the machine, the cutter head. And if I was to slip right now, I can go right into that cutter head. I'd rather lose the push stick than the tips of my fingers. So you'll see some people, holding the board this way. That's very dangerous, right? So you want 2 push sticks, one in the back, one in the front. The one in the back is nice to use the larger push stick. A lot of people like to hold it this way. I don't worry about holding it tight to the fence because the guard is spring loaded. So you're really just trying to hold it down steady, right? And then when you get to here, now it's going to hit the table because it's not running right now. But you should just stay like this all the way through. And just advance it until the guard closes behind you before you go to pick up the board. So that's how you would do a face of a board. If you're doing the edge of a board, it's the same thing. The left-hand push stick just holds it tight to the fence. The top one can be on the top of the board. Again, we're going to have to help it here because it's not running. Like this. If this push stick is too high, the board's going to do this, and you can't see from here. Now, obviously, this is way crooked, but if it was just slightly crooked and I was holding it up here, I couldn't see that there's a space. Probably can see in the back here that there's a space, but I'm not standing where I can see that either, usually when I'm operating it. You want to be having enough pressure from the bottom that it pushes it tight. So this pressure of this lower push stick really is what kind of tells you that you're tight to the fence. And by the way, the surface, you always do a face first so you have a good face to put against the fence. We'll talk about that again in a minute. But that's how you would use push sticks when using the joint. Let's get back to our list of safety here and finish this up. As we mentioned before, safety rule number 5 is don't joint stock shorter than 12 inches long. Always hold the board against the table and the fence using 2 push sticks like we just demonstrated. Be aware of the exposed cutter head behind the fence, especially when joining near the edge of the board. Right in the back here, there's a little bit of the cutter head that can be exposed. Right now it's probably not because we've got the fence way back. But when the fence is up in the front, you don't want to be putting your fingers back here because there is an opening that the cutter head will be exposed. So just be aware of that spot. You don't typically stick your fingers in there, but again, that's another reason why you would not want to adjust the fence with it running, because you could grab it there and expose your fingers to that cutter head. Never stand directly behind the machine. The danger zone is in line with the machine, so if it was to kick something out, it would go back this way. So if somebody was running the sander, you could not use the sander and the joiner at the same time because they'd be in the danger zone. The other joiner on the other side of the room has the same situation. The belt sander is in line with the danger zone of the joiner, so you could not use those 2 machines at the same time either. So one person would have to wait. Turn off the machine and wait for the cutter head to completely stop before leaving the machine. You can do that on any machine. And of course, you disconnect the machine from the power source before you did any service or repairs on the machine. So that's the safety. So let's talk about setting the machine up to use. And we've already kind of done a few of the things. So the first thing you're going to do is set the fence. And again, lay the board down. We're going to do a face first. So we're going to adjust this. So again, we have ½ inch, ¾ of an inch of cutter head showing here. but we haven't pushed the fence back beyond the cutter head over there. So we got the fence in the correct position. And doing a face, the position, the angle of the fence isn't critical, but if you wanted to check it, you could take this and check that 90 like I did before, right? But right now, it's just that it's in the right position, left and right. And it's really just a matter of the depth of cut being correct. We set that before to a 1/16 of an inch, and we're good to go. We want to use the sawdust collector when we're using the joiner. The sawdust collector system has blast gates on every machine, so make sure the blast gate is open so that the suction will work on this particular machine. When you're not using the machine, close the blast gate, of course. And then we're going to turn the machine on. The sawdust collector switch is right here, so we turn that on. Now, another important thing is the board should be cup side down, because with the cup side up, we get a board that has a little better, a little more dramatically here. Cup side up, the board can rock. With the cup side down, it sits a little steadier. Okay, and that's what you want. You don't want it wiggling as you go through, because the whole purpose here is to get this flat. So we want to have it sitting pretty steady as we run it across. Okay, so cup side down, proper depth of cut at the 1/16 of an inch. Fence is in the right position, and I think we're ready to go. So going to grab, I'll push it back here. Turn this on. Okay, and now you're going to stand here. And then, as you're working, pushing the board through, so here's the spinning cutter head. Don't be afraid to take a step or two as you go along with the machine. And you can see it will take off the high spots, or the low spots in this case. And you're going to do that again to get it a better cut, make it a complete good face. Again, I continue until the guard goes behind the machine. Now that's pretty good. I can finish that up on the planer if I wanted to, or if I wanted to take another pass here, I could. I think I'm going to leave that for now. I like to leave the board as thick as possible at the beginning. So that's the first face. So that's how you would do the face of a board. I would do I have 3 boards here, I would do all 3 of them the same way. Then, once I have all 3 of them done on the face, I'm going to adjust it to do the edges. Now, if I'm working with a friend, like maybe 2 guys are working together, I'll do my boards on the face, and I'll step aside since it's already set up, let my buddy do his boards on the face, so I'm not adjusting the machine 100 times. Then, once he's done, then we'll step back and say, all right, let's do our edges now, and then I'm going to readjust this to do the edge. I got the machine at a stop. I'm going to unlock the face, and I'm going to pull it over. It always squeaks. I'm going to check my angle now. This is where the angle is important. It's off just a hair, so you can see how that gets off every once in a while. This handle, by the way, over here, is just a handle to, I kind of bump it up and down when I want to change the angle. It doesn't release anything. It's just something to hold on to. All right, so now I got my face good. Okay, my fence good. I'm sorry. There's a note on the handout. I don't know if you can pick it up with the camera or not. It talks about grain direction. And what's going on here is, I don't usually look at this unless I have a problem, but if the grain near the edge of the board is sloping down, when the cutter head comes into it, it's going to tear that grain up. But if the grain is sloping away from the cutter head, it'll cut it smooth. And that's what we're showing in these 2 drawings. So this is not what you want, this is what you want. But sometimes, even if the grain's going slightly the wrong way, it still comes out okay. So usually what I do is I just run the board over, and if there's a problem, then I'll take a look at the grain and see if I can figure out if it's a grain direction issue. All right. So it's on the handout, and that's what that's talking about right there. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. All right. So I'm now going to do an edge, and we're going to take the good face, put the good face of the board against the fence. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they put the rough side here, and now I'm making this edge 90 degrees to a curved, rough, irregular face, which is really no good to me. The reason I did the face first is so I can put it against the fence and now get this edge 90 degrees to that face. So that's important, okay? Good face against the fence. So So have this away from the cutter head, start it up, same depth of cut, push stick lower than the top edge of the fence to hold it tight, and then you can run it through. That came out pretty good. Now if you have the, I'm going to do this once more, if you have the push stick too low, it's going to kind of get in the way of the guard, and that's going to be a pain in the neck. So I like to have it just higher than the guard, but lower than the top of the fence. Is a good position. That works really nice. Good. Now that's how we do that. Now I want to show you one other thing too that I didn't talk about was the speed that I was going through with. And it's easier to see on a face, so I'm going to do one of the other boards. I'm going to readjust it for the face again. So again, it's a good review. Let the cutter head stop spinning, readjust the fence so that I'm going to be able to fit the board through, but I'm not past the cutter head. Okay. So I've got about a ½ inch space.
There will be a meeting in room 21 at 11:30 this morning today. All that is.
So then we're going to go through here. This is a good speed. That last half was too fast. And you can see why. Look at the board. I don't know if the camera can pick this up. Can you see from about this point on, there's more ripples in the board? It's like, it looks like waves. I don't know if we can see it or not, but there's definitely more texture here than here. So I've maybe saved myself, 2 seconds time-wise in joining the face, but I probably created 20 minutes worth of sanding to get that out. So it pays to go at a nice, comfortable, slow speed so the machine has time to cut and leave a smooth surface. So a slower speed will give you a better cut than a fast speed. Right? So slow is always better. True also on the planer. This is like what we're talking about not too long from now. So I'll take a quick look at the handout, make sure we've covered everything. Okay, use push sticks. Obviously, do not ever try to do this with your fingers, with your hands. Slow feed produces a better cut. Always allow the guard to close before you pick the board up, and always have the sawdust collector on. Close until do that until the guard closes. And again, never fingers. All right. Here, I have the potential of trimming off the tips of my fingers if my fingers slip off, and here. Obviously, my thumb is in a very dangerous spot. And if the board was to kick out, both hands are in a dangerous situation. So that's the joiner. Hopefully you've learned that, and review the notes. The notes will be online, and there is a test on this that you need to pass. Thank you.